my pal Curtis Mosley in Texas has taken us some banjo strumming and a really neat CD of gospel banjo music, and I told him, this is Jonah and the Whale, and I told him I'd get his song on. You can get it through iTunes or through me on live at this station. So Leslie, we're coming back to that moment of, okay, I want a divorce, and all of a sudden your world comes crashing down. Now, I've any number of circumstances, did you see the train coming before it hit you? Didn't it? Whatever the case may be. Maybe you should have seen it, maybe you didn't see it. Right now we're talking about spilled milk. I did want to get to the right lawyer question. And we had a discussion before we got on the air about how good practitioners, whatever they do, should be about their clients' interests and not their own. And not everybody that you run into, as we both know, has your best interests at heart. What are some of the telltale signs? You advocate a 2 or 3 consultation audition to who is right for you. What are some of the things that might be red flags or might be good qualities in choosing the right representative for you?
Well, when you visit an attorney, I really think that it's really a matter of personal style. And there are lawyers who will handle matters in the same fashion regardless of the circumstances. So when you go in and speak to an attorney and you give them your scenario and you express to them that you want this to be amicable as possible for your children, you have young children, you don't want to have, a down and dirty divorce, no name calling or whatever it is. You want what's fair. If the attorney agrees with you and says, we can do that, we can work out a settlement agreement, we'll work with the other lawyer, but they also let you know they can't control the other side, then you're in pretty good hands in knowing that that attorney has your interest at heart and will follow your wishes. However, on the flip side, sometimes you go to a lawyer and, you talk about your financials and they tell you tell them what the financials are, and they see that there's big money, and maybe you don't want as much as they can get you, and they push you and say, but you can have this, and you can have this, and you can have that. So they're really sort of riling you up, and that's really not what your goal is. Then maybe that's not the attorney for you. I mean, of course, if you've been completely wronged and you're not going to get what you're entitled to because your spouse has already told you, I'm never going to give you anything, and you're going to live in the streets, and things like that, which, believe it or not, do happen, especially when there's a lot of money, which is, you would think it wouldn't be that way, but it is. Then maybe that's not the attorney for you. So it's really a matter of style and being comfortable with the person you hire, because you're going to be telling them very confidential information, which of course remains with them forever, even long after they've represented you. The attorney can never tell, your secrets or your confidences to anyone else. So you have to feel completely safe with that person to be able to tell them what they need to know to best represent you and advise you as to what they think is the best course of action for you.
And
Sometimes it takes maybe you'll hit it on the first interview with a lawyer. Maybe you won't, but that's why I say it can take up to 3 because it's a matter of personal style.
And, it's the kind of thing, it's like, how could I put it? I say this to everyone, and I oftentimes might offend myself, is that when you're reasoning to get to something, and you're mentally okay with it, where it's choosing a person, a business, an investment, or whatever, you're probably making the wrong decision. Whereas if it doesn't really sit right with you, where your brain is overriding your heart, that's never good. But like if you're comfortable with it and you can kind of go about it, maybe not as acutely as this, without thinking about it, and you're comfortable with the person, then you've landed in the right place.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, at least for the clients who come through my door, I really try and have them focus on where do you want to be 5
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to be living in the same house you're in now, in the same city you're in now? Do you want a new career? Tell me what your future goals are. Because when I know what those goals are, at least at the moment, when you're really sort of thinking where you want to head, it makes it easier to make a plan and help keep the client focused on the positive, so that, you know, the petty things that come up that may not be worth fighting for, you know, I won't go as low as to say sometimes they fight over a toilet seat, but things like that, you can let them go.
Yeah.
And you can focus on the big stuff, the things that are important, that are going to help put you in a better place in life, so that when it's all over and said and done, you can look back and say, hey, you know, we were really, you know, dignified. We really did that with respect. Our children respect us. You know, they feel loved. They feel secure. And look, we both come out better for it. I mean, I have many clients that end up very close friends with their ex-spouse, and it works out very well for the children, and then ultimately there are blended families that come from that. So, again, like I said, it's really a matter of personal style. You can go by reputation, but, you know, be careful of the reputation that's out there when hiring an attorney. Really make sure you're hiring someone you can align yourself with.
And that is ever so important. Thank you for sharing that. Getting back to our couple in the kitchen, now we have the aggrieved wife who is dropped the groceries on the floor, and the first thing she's thinking about, and this leads to your question number 6, is, I know why he's doing this. It's that X person whom he's been hanging around with. She may have even, excuse me, been in my house, been in places that are unique to me, and I want to get the, use whatever adjective you want, out of here. Should you leave? Could you leave?
Okay, well, the short answer is no. You just can't leave. Now, we're not talking about a situation where there's abuse. I want to be really clear.
Right.
Wherever there's abuse, you call 911 and you run. You call your lawyer second. Okay, so we're not discussing that situation. Wherever there's an abusive situation, you would get out, get your children out, whatever you have to do to get away from any kind of abuse. And that can include emotional abuse as well. Okay? So I just want to say that as a caveat. But in short, you don't want to just bolt from the marital residence and give up, not that you wouldn't have rights to it later on or rights to, you know, profit from a sale, but when you leave the home and go away and like throw up your hands and say, well, I'm done with you and I don't want the house, you're now giving the spouse who stayed behind the upper hand to then say, well, you left. I'm going to stay in the marital residence during the divorce. You go live somewhere else, and I'm going to ask the court to let me stay here because you walked away. And sometimes they get it. In New York, we call that exclusive use and occupancy of the marital residence. Now, obviously, if there's not enough finances for the spouses to live in 2 homes, then they will have to live under one roof. Again, as long as there's no abuse, okay? But they will end up having to live under one roof until we can sort out the mess. And what will happen is one spouse will take one bedroom, one spouse will take another, some spouse will go in the basement, and they will like live separately and apart, but in the same residence. If you are able to come to an agreement where one spouse moves out, you know, for the duration of the divorce, then that is one way of being able to leave and, you know, not, give up any rights there too. And I would have an agreement drafted really by a lawyer so that it's executed in the style of a deed, which means it's signed and witnessed or notarized. And then you can leave the house free and clear and you can both live separate and apart, which a lot of times works better if there's a lot of animosity going on between the 2 spouses. Now, if there's enough money or if there's a secondary residence, then generally one spouse will take one will take the other, or there'll be an arrangement made where, you know, the rent is paid for one spouse to move out during the time of the divorce, which usually is beneficial to the family if there's young children and there's a lot of fighting going on. But you generally can't force a spouse out of the house unless, again, there's been abuse, and abuse needs to be documented. You can't be a he said, she said kind of thing, because anyone can say anything. So, as I've told clients before, if, you know, someone's coming out at you, whether it's with fist or 911 first. You call me later.
Now, I'm curious. You practice in New York, and I used to years ago, and there's something called, for the benefit, you're well aware of it, spousal elective shares. If one spouse dies, the other spouse is entitled to a share of the estate. In my state, Connecticut, the spousal elective share is so pitifully low as to be almost laughable. But a state like New York, and please correct me if I'm wrong, a spouse, upon the demise of another spouse, if they've been excluded from a will or something, they get to take a third, at least minimally a third of what is ever there.
As long as they were married when the spouse died.
Okay, now I want to bring it back to the kitchen, where our wife has split, you blankety blank, I'm getting the blank out of here, and 2 days later, her husband wakes up dead. Has she abandoned him?
Well,
Heavy, yeah, heavy.
well, let me just say that if, the husband ends up dead, hopefully it's not a homicide scene.
Right.
In New York now, we have what's called irretrievable breakdown of the marital relationship, which is similar to irreconcilable differences. Okay? So, although there are grounds for divorce, like abandonment, adultery, and things like that, they're not as widely used unless there's some financial advantage to be gained from that.
Understood.
So, in other words, which leads us really to question 8. Is it to my advantage if my spouse cheated on me?
Yeah.
In some states, the offended spouse will be given more money just because there was an affair in the marriage. New York is not one of them. But not just because there was an affair, but in states like New York, what would happen is if the affair was ongoing and long-term, and money from what would otherwise be part of the marital estate was used to fund the affair, now that money, which we would also call a dissipation of marital assets, would have to be determined as to how much was spent outside of the marriage
Interesting.
on the extramarital affair, and how much of that should come back to the offended spouse. And maybe they will get more than half based on the offense, or based on interest, because what if it was a long-term, ongoing, 10-plus year affair? So it's not an advantage where, like, adultery is a crime. It's an advantage where there are marital assets that were wasted on the affair and not spent on the marriage that the offended spouse would otherwise be entitled to under the law.
So it all depends where you're at,
True.
pretty much.
That's true. I mean, I will say Virginia is one of those states where if you've cheated on your spouse, then you will be paid through the nose just for the affair alone.
Yeah, as my first wife, my late wife Jane would say, "Oh, what a tangled web we weave when we practice to deceive." And
That's a very good one. A lot of habits, I'll have to remember that. And then, of course, whenever there's been infidelity, the very first thing the offended spouse wants to do is hire a private investigator.
right.
Yes, which is question number 9, should I hire a private investigator? Well, there are a lot of good reasons to hire private investigators. One, you could have a spouse that had their own business for years, and then all of a sudden, since there's been, disharmony in the marriage, it seems like the income's not coming in, business is bad, all of a sudden the business starts to go away. Or they're not holding a job, so they say. So, especially where there are children and there should be child support, using a private investigator to see where your spouse spends their day, if they're actually going to a job or meeting with clients, really to establish the paper trail for money, could be a very, very, very useful tool. And almost all lawyers have private investigators they can, recommend you to for that specific service. If you're going to hire a private investigator to find out if they're actually having that affair that they're really having, I don't recommend that. I think that's a waste of money. Again, unless it's for the financial purpose of finding out how much money was spent, which we can do through financial records. Law
Sure.
a private investigator to already tell you what you already know. I've had people want to get photographs and things like that, and that to me really serves no purpose, and there is no closure. It just makes it worse. I feel the best use of private investigators is really for the money trail and the working trail, because believe it or not, there are people that don't want to pay for their children, and they will go out of their way to make their spouse, who's the primary caregiver to the children, miserable by claiming they have no work. And just a caveat, you can't quit your job. At least in the state of New York, if you quit your job, the courts will hold you up to whatever your tax return has said for the past few years. And if you intentionally make your income lower, and it can be proven, you will be held to what's on your tax return. Because we don't like to let people off the hook for child support because they're mad at their spouse.
Well, yeah, and that's that's a valuable social goal. In our just couple of minutes remaining on question 10, what can I do to prevent my spouse from poisoning the children against me? To me, it doesn't. It could be the brother-in-law, the sister-in-law, the grandparent, the mother-in-law. I never liked the name your own adjective or noun anyway. And
you have to be 100% correct. I mean, I've seen it many times where it's the grandparents bad-mouthing, the spouse out of the house. The aunt, the uncle, the cousin. It happens a lot. Forget your spouse. If your spouse can't control him or herself, then obviously you're going to be in court because it's not friendly. And then the court's going to get involved, and then there could be supervised visitation if it's really severe, or there could be restraining orders. I mean, there could be a whole host of things that happen to prevent one spouse from, trying to poison the children against the other. And family members who partake in that behavior can be restrained from seeing the children during the divorce and thereafter. Just because you have a cousin or an aunt and uncle, you don't necessarily have a right to see those minor children. I mean, grandparents generally have a relationship, and they can come to court and say, we still want to have this relationship with our, grandchildren or, granddaughter, grandson, and the court will say, well, that's okay, but if you're going to use it as a session to, bash their mother or father, then we're not going to allow that. So it's hopefully you have a amicable relationship with your spouse where both of you respect each other enough, at least in front of your children, to keep your mouth shut so that you don't bring in, the court. Because who needs a court telling you when you can see your children or, which family member can see your children? But if people can't control themselves, they will. And if the situation is really bad, what will happen is the children will get their own lawyer appointed by the court, and the parents will have to pay for it. And that lawyer will represent those children's interests. I mean, that's a very, very sad road to go down, and unfortunately happens more often than not.
Well, and it's all...
They're so angry at each other that they can't see the big picture, which is what I keep talking about, the 5-year plan down the road. Where do you want your children to see you, and how do you want to be seen in their eyes? So,
and it's all think before you act.
Yeah,
for certain. Leslie, believe it or not, we've just sped to the finish line and we're out of time. Where can our friends and fans reach you?
Thanks so much, Tony.
Oh, and no, Leslie, I wanted you to mention where you can be reached.
Oh, I'm sorry. I can be reached at either Leslie at AskLeslieTheLawyer.com at my email, or you can visit me at AskLeslieTheLawyer.com on my website, and there are many ways to get in touch with me through there. So if you have some questions or need some information, please visit me again at AskLeslieTheLawyer.com.
And thank you for being so gracious with your time, and we'll be talking soon. Best to Joe. Take care.
Okay, take care, Tony. Thank you so much, everyone.
And that was Leslie the Lawyer Montanile at Ask Leslie the Lawyer. So happy to have her here today. We're going to jump out for a quick break, and we're going to be looking at some baseball trailers of classic baseball movies here right after this on Connecticut Morning.